Today's podcast is supported by TRM. TRM enables compliance teams to accelerate business revenue and deliver actionable intelligence to regulatory and law enforcement stakeholders with leading attribution of severe risk categories. Request a free trial today at trmlabs.com. I'm Yaya Jata Fanusie. What does it take to run a nation's anti-financial crime agency and stay one step ahead of those trying to skirt the system and law? My guest will give you a glimpse of the challenges and steep learning curve involved when illicit actors adapt to the changing world of finance faster than the government agencies tasked with stopping them. From 2016 to 2022, Shlomit Wagman was Director General of the Israel Money Laundering and Terror Financing Prohibition Authority. She served at a time when terrorist groups in the region first began experimenting with cryptocurrencies. She saw their new methods up close and helped develop technologies and investigative methodologies to go after them. It's the first time I've been able to talk to someone who has led operations on such a massive scale. She's now a Chief Regulatory and Compliance Officer at the global payments company Rapid, and we spoke about how payments, technology, and financial crime are trending from her point of view. It's time to get designated with Shlomit Wagman. Could you please maybe start us off by telling us some background? Tell us of how you arrived to become Director General of the Israel Financial Intelligence Unit.
Thank you. So throughout my career, I've always been in the intersection of technology, regulation, and financial market. After graduating from law school, I clerked for the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, Aaron Barak, and then I pursued my master's and PhD degrees at Yale Law School, focusing on law and technology. And after completing my PhD, I joined the law firm of Wachtell Lipton in New York, where I worked with high-profile M&A deals with some of the world's top legal minds. And after a couple of years, I returned to Israel. And then I decided to make a transition to public service. And I was very fortunate to join the Israeli Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing Prohibition Authority as General Counsel, or its other name, the Israeli FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. And I was not familiar with the field earlier, but I quickly became experienced in that and was recognized as a lead expert in the field. I was, in fact, selected by the Council of Europe to serve as an evaluator on its audits on member countries and, get some experience in the field. And after a couple of years, I was appointed to be the Director General of the Israeli FIU. And in this role, I had two major tasks. First was to improve and modernize the FIU, which was essential. The practices that the FIU had at that time were a little bit outdated, and there was very limited contribution to financial investigations. So I led a deep strategical process to make sure that the FIU becomes much more data-driven, embrace new technologies, and significantly improve its internal processes, the intelligence capabilities, and collaboration with investigating authorities. And basically, we embraced the follow the money approach and led in Israel to a record-breaking financial investigation numbers and results, improving dramatically the collaboration between the FIU and the police.
Shlomit, if I could back up just 1 second, give us the timeline here. Around what time was this?
So I joined the FIU at around 2011 and became the head of the FIU at 2016.
Okay.
And that was a time in which, due to, the processes that we conducted at the FIU, we gained an amazing improvement in that, and were able to crack down major organized crime in Israel. That was, I think, during the years between 2016 and 2022. We were at all times records in terms of financial investigations, and we were able to actually practice the follow the money approach. We won numerous international awards for successful international investigation, and the FIU was granted the highest effectiveness score by FATF as in addition. But I think that another important strategical process that happened at that time was the Israeli accession to FATF. That was my major other task other than establishing the FIU, and that was to lead Israel accession to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, the international organization that sets global standards in the AML and CFT domain. And that required to undergo a comprehensive evaluation by the FATF members. To be frank, at first we conducted an internal assessment in Israel, and we realized that Israel is most likely to be gray listed by FATF because we had major deficiencies in our system.
Well, I wonder if you could pause there, if we could just go back to one thing, because I mean, you mentioned, so you were part of improving, it sounded like you said improving data, sort of improving the, I would say almost the financial forensics, the follow the money approach, that there were organized crime, FATF, and the FATF, potentially Israel being on the FATF gray list. But give us a sense of, I mean, you mentioned organized crimes groups. I mean, what were the key targets? What were the key types of criminal activity, especially organized crime, which again, I don't know about that much about in the Israeli setting. What were the financial crime targets or issues that you were dealing with then?
Yeah, so Israel major challenges are organized crime, money service businesses, underground banking, hawala, a lot of tax offenses, and additional related, and of course, terrorism financing. And in order to address those domains, usually you need to find the facilitators, because all those activities require advanced money laundering capabilities. So the challenge was how to go after the facilitators, not only the criminals themselves in each one of those phenomena.
And so, can you tell us about, even before getting to what happened with FATF? I mean, what were some of? I mean, obviously, as Director General, you had a high sort of authoritative role. But what were some of the cases, interesting cases that you saw and perhaps prosecuted or dealt with?
Yeah, so we had like numerous of interesting cases. I think that one very first we had many corruption cases, and in all those cases, the financial investigation was a crucial part of it. It was including a candidate to become the Israel president, who was back then was a minister, a senior minister, and it all started with a SAR, a single SAR, filed by one of the financial institutions, and then initiated financial investigation, open testimony in which he provided his version of the situation, and one of the questions related to a details which was revealed as part of the financial investigation, and that was an open questioning. It was still not under a formal investigation, and he was lying on this question. Now, in financial intelligence, sometimes it's a binary situation, either that you have the fact or not, and we had the trail, and he was lying about this particular fact, and then immediately the investigator made a phone call to the Attorney General, said, Houston, we have a problem, we're in this situation, and immediately it turned into a formal investigation based on this item. Another case that I could refer to, perhaps the diamond dealers in Israel, which we found to be actually that they were functioning in addition of being diamond dealers, also underground banking industry, and they were transferring lots of funds through their activity. We were always also able to find out how money changer provider exchangers were actually were facilitators to large organized crime facilities. Again, it all came from financial intelligence. And one of the interesting phenomena that we addressed was professional money launderers. And my approach has always been not to go after, individual case only. Yes, of course, we would do those cases and we'll investigate them. But I was thinking about how to make sure that we're more efficient and effective. And instead of taking out one fish at a time, how, to actually look at the school of fish and to find phenomena and concentrate on them. And we did that in a couple of methods. First, through task forces, joint forces with other law enforcement authorities and choosing particular phenomena to go after. But second, and I think that perhaps it's even more interesting because it provides toolbox also to private sector, is to identify a phenomena that exists in your data, and with enhanced data-driven analytics and pattern analysis and network analysis to find the pattern and the phenomena. For example, professional money launderers. So we would try and create and craft what are the characteristics that are defining those groups, and then to look for additional cases that have the same phenomena and go after them. And that was extremely successful exercise because we were able to find those enablers, those facilitators in many different cases or initiate new cases, which we were not familiar of earlier.
And this is, this is a time 2016 to, I think you said 2016 to 2022 or yep, right, that time. And I remember that time because that's the time when I started to, 2016, look closely at financial crime and crypto. Tell us about how crypto financing came on your radar.
So the first time that I heard about cryptocurrencies was around 2012, where we started receiving indications from the private sector about these emerging phenomena. So to better understand that, we engage with companies and players in the field to better understand that. Now, the first thing that we did, as many global regulators did at that time, we issued a public warning about the risk associated with crypto and acknowledging that it provides lots of opportunities to bad actors to act. After this first reaction, we delved more deeply into the phenomena, and we recognized two key insights. And I think that I was the leader here in Israel about developing this approach. First, that cryptocurrencies, in addition to all the risks that are associated with them and the benefits that they bring to criminals, they were also a financial innovation. And I thought that it could not be simply blocked because black market will be developed very quickly. And second, not only that this is a financial innovation, but blockchain, in addition to all the problems that it brings up, which are all known by now, it also has an advantage. It leaves digital tracks. And unlike cash, every transaction is recorded and presented in a unique opportunity in the blockchain, and it presents unique opportunity for law enforcement to follow it. So back then, tracing this transaction over the blockchain seems almost science fiction, but we did recognize, this capability, and we thought that it's possible to make from the lemon lemonades. And over the years, I have to say honestly that I was approached multiple times by Minister of Finance and other official stakeholders asking me to help them outlaw and prohibit crypto activity altogether. But I consistently advise against the prohibition approach because I thought that it made much more sense to monitor and regulate the industry and then, control it to some extent, or at least be able to differentiate between legitimate and non-legitimate actors, rather than just push it underground. And, over the time, this approach has been accepted globally by FATF in 2018 when it was integrated into the standards. Later on, I implemented that in Israel, and this is the common approach now, I think, across the globe. I don't think that there are countries that are outlawing that.
So this was, in the early time, and then you were getting a grapple a handle on it. But I imagine with this new technology arriving and you trying to follow it and track it, that it wasn't all, 100% success. Tell us about any of the obstacles that you dealt with.
Well, okay. There were many obstacles. And of course, it's extremely challenging to follow the money, generally speaking, and in crypto as well. So one of the challenges that, first it took us a lot of time to understand the technology, to gain the capabilities, to purchase the relevant, blockchain analytics tool that exists in private sector and develop internally system. And, it also, even to know what to look for. At first, when you need to look for, the codes, the numbers of the wallets, even just to configure that into your system, that there is something like that. This is, it sounds extremely technical, but this is something that you need to do if you want to get the data and to explore that. So we had a lot of difficulties at first. Investigator were not familiar with that, and they did not understand that. They were reluctant of even getting into that. Let's, human nature, we should acknowledge that. But then we started eventually to investigate those cases, and at first we made mistakes. For example, we confiscated a wallet which we thought that was associated with a terror organized group. We traced a couple of thousands of dollars that went to that wallet, and then when we got the details of the wallet, all of a sudden there was much more money in it there. I think that we were looking for $20K, and we found out $800,000 something. We were so happy, and immediately we confiscated that. And then what we found out, that was not the wallet of the user itself, but that was, a central wallet of an exchange. So we had to release most of the funds there. But at the same time, we also had many success stories. For example, one of the investigations that we had nationally, there was like a large ransomware case in which ransomware was asked to release a critical infrastructure that was attacked. And through the negotiation, there were a couple of Bitcoins that were transferred back and forth, in order just to go good intention and to show that the hacker have control over it. The hackers group has control over that. And we at the FIU were able to trace the crypto. And what we found out that it went eventually and cashed out to cash in a VASP, which was located in a certain jurisdiction that within the Israeli context made a very clear connection to actually national threat, a terror attack. It was exchanged in Iran. So once we saw that the Bitcoin was cashed out in Tehran, it gave a completely different flavor to the entire story, and it moved from a criminal investigation into a national security one. Also, another, I think, successful example is the confiscation of Hamas wallet. So Hamas is one of the organizations that was an early adopter along with ISIS to do fund raising through crypto. And we were able to trace some of this activity, and Israel designated, it's the name of your podcast, designated this wallet. And immediately we start receiving, a lot of information about that, and we did it for quite some time. And at some point, we're able to confiscate millions of dollars. At some point, April 2023, Hamas published a public announcement to its supporter, asking them to stop contributing or send out, the donation via Bitcoin. And why is that so? Because of the designation and the linkage that the Israelis law enforcement authorities were able to make. Those donors were adversely impacted by their affiliation with Hamas, and all their wallets were confiscated immediately, were frozen immediately. So they've asked them stop using that. By the way, they did not stop using crypto at all. They just changed it from blockchain, which was high on the radar, to other coins like Tron, which are less monitored.
They changed from Bitcoin and started using other tokens. These actors, illicit actors, always adapt. Terrorist financing with crypto is new. I'm sure that there are new adaptations. I know in 2020, I think it was 2023, or I forget exactly when, you testified before a Senate Banking Committee, and you actually, in fact, I think that's when I first saw you. You were testifying about terrorist financing and crypto. So can you give us a sense of what are the trends now? What's the direction, and how are authorities dealing with it?
Yes, definitely. I indeed testified about that, and one of the questions there was, whether Bitcoin or blockchain should be cryptocurrencies should be prohibited, and I gave the same answer as I gave earlier here. So I actually have quite an updated information on that, as I just came back from the No Money for Terrorism conference, which was held in Germany, and brought together Minister of Finance from all over the world to discuss this particular question: what are the current trends of digital assets being used by terror organizations, and what can be done about it? So what we see is that terror organizations are using crypto more and more. They never neglected the core channels that they were using, namely cash, hawala, and business infrastructure. But alongside that, they're also adopting more and more cryptocurrencies. They're not doing only just, the traditional or the more conservative cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins, but they are going into DeFi, hawala-style application, Web3, and more and enhanced privacy-preserving technologies. And we see a growing trend into that. It includes smart contracts and so forth. For example, a couple of examples that I could share is crowdfunding activity that was conducted by ISIS and Hamas. We see money laundering between fiat and crypto conducted by Hezbollah in LATAM. We see direct funding of terror activity, for example, in France, and sanction evasions and so forth in, unregulated VASPs, for example, Russian and Chinese VASP, which are actually they're regulated, but they're not in compliance or in full compliance with the global standards, and they are exploiting this weak link in order to enter into the financial system and launder the funds there. One of the facilitators of doing that we see is indeed the regulatory arbitrage between countries and between enforcement of certain countries of the existing regulation. There are certain countries that are allowing VASPs to operate much more freely and without enforcing the international rules, and we see clearly that those terror organizations are using that. We can give, for example, which was in its indictment and the fine that it got from the US regulators, it was clearly indicated that they were allowing Hamas activists to operate. And we see, the recent Guarantex designation, which allowed sanction evasion and so on. So we see those as one of the reasons. We also see that there is not sufficient technological capabilities to law enforcement and private sector to address that. We see that there are not enough collaboration and information sharing between private sector and government, and between internally between private sector, and lack of capabilities and technological capabilities to follow that, for just to name a few.
So if a big issue is not having the right capabilities, I mean, you mentioned what helped you and your organization, your team early, right? Following the money, blockchain analysis. What's the state of blockchain analysis tools as far as you can tell?
So I think that, there's a huge improvement in that field, and it becomes, the golden standard for everyone to use that, and we rely a lot on it. However, as a person who strongly supports the approach of having network analysis, pattern analysis, and being able to use, big data for that, I think that right now, most of the tools that the industry uses are very forensic in their nature. They are more doing, the pathological investigation rather than proactive real-time prevention of the activity. And I think, and I see that already coming up, that there is a second generation of blockchain analytics companies, and I'm working with some of them, that they are developing the cluster approach, that they are addressing that in a more holistic way and manner, which allows actually to have real-time monitoring and prevention of more complex environments, including DeFi, not just centralized environment, but decentralized environment, to go through mixers, smart contract, and so forth, which are exactly the tools that the advanced terror organization and criminal organization are now using and exploiting. And, I can give you an example. I was recently shown Iranian infrastructure to launder funds. And what we've seen there is those clusters, cluster after cluster after cluster. Each one of them is composed of dozens of thousands of wallets that are doing lots of structuring and layering across the global ecosystem. Now, if you're doing a linear investigation as a VASP or as a law enforcement, you will never be able to efficiently and effectively understand or prevent the phenomena because each investigation is very limited. And I know that more and more organizations are trying to look at the big picture, but still it moves much faster than what we could actually envision. And you see how they are changing the cluster from one to second to third to fourth and fifth. And unless you have those tools that allowing you to have the same pattern and cluster analysis in real time, the combat against them will not be successful. And actually, if I may say, you even get like a green flag when you are running the single transaction through those engines, and you don't see the full picture, and you're actually being misused to launder funds or even terror funds.
So it sounds like you're sort of advocating for a more data-focused, data-driven machine learning approach, if I may say. I mean, how is artificial intelligence, or how can artificial intelligence AI be leveraged for these types of activities?
That's an excellent question. I think that this is the solution. So we see that, traditional tools, rule-based, are very limited, but AI can leverage the capabilities in crypto and in crime in general on how to expand the view and be able to process much more data in a very short period of time and be able to actually address that. We should also acknowledge that AI allows much more activity on the adversarial and adverse side. I've been researching a lot, AI on my academic affiliation and so forth. But for us, I think that what would be interesting to discuss is that, in the AI arena, fraud and social engineering becoming much more accessible, cheap, and scalable. I can give you a couple of examples. For example, using deep fake in order to cause people to transfer funds to someone that they thought that instructed them to do so. There is a case of $25 million that transferred by an employee to her CFO as it was instructed in a Zoom conversation by her CFO, which was a deep fake to a third party. We could also see the use of images, of even video images to do manipulation to log in and log into website. You see, people sitting with fake idea, which actually, you see their faces, but this is all deep fake. You can create very easily campaign of phishing by using fraud GTP. That's a new tool that's really amazing. We all use chat GTP. Criminals have fraud GPT.
Fraud GPT. Wow.
Yes. Yeah, it was actually shown me that, and that's amazing. You could type in and ask, can you please produce for me a campaign, a phishing campaign, let's say that we look exactly like Chase Manhattan Bank website with the same logo, fonts, colors, and URL that we look authentic enough. And it produces that in 20 seconds. Now, organized crime group, they need to invest resources in order to create those campaigns. All of a sudden, it became very cheap and accessible and at scale, because instead of, sending those phishing attack to a limited number, you could just, spread it all over. And, social engineering can create boots that are really seems to be person, and everything is scalable. And I think that in the fraud domains, and companies need to understand that the threats are growing and growing, because that's become the industry benchmark, the standard for those criminal organizations. They're smart, they're clever, they want to save resources, they want to be very effective, and they're using that more and more. And back to your question, the only way to actually address that successfully is using machines, because a person cannot trace that any longer. And we have to take that, into that level as well, acknowledging that they are going to be much more attacked, and they're going to be much more sophisticated and at scale. So financial institutions have to embed that into their practices, into their fraud prevention, into their monitoring system, and advance AI to be able to cope up with the new challenges and numbers of attack that they're going to experience.
TRM offers leading blockchain intelligence for AML compliance at financial institutions, crypto businesses, and regulatory organizations alike, with sanction support on 65 blockchains and coverage of more than 70 million digital assets. In a recent customer survey, 85% of users agree that TRM accelerates their work. 92% of users agree that TRM provides actionable intelligence, and 83% of users agree that TRM has provided intelligence they would not otherwise have. See for yourself why customers rave about TRM by requesting a free trial or demo at trmlabs.com. Financial institutions are going to have to really up their game, get more sophisticated, start thinking proactively about using AI and being on defense. Any thoughts on what FIUs need to do to prepare and deal with AI?
Yeah, definitely. So FIUs are at the same situation as other financial institutions. They all have to adopt AI. But for governmental agencies, and here I could again speak from my experience, there are additional challenges. In addition of the need, to adopt the technology, embed that, and work with that, they also need to think on additional consideration and that bias of the system. And what do I mean? When I was at the FIU, we already used back then, as being a data-driven organization, we already used algorithms, machine learning algorithms, which are very similar to what we see now with AI. Mm-hmm. And one of the tasks that we were asked the algorithms was to find patterns. For example, if I'll use the example that I mentioned before, to identify professional money launderers. Now, the system was extremely biased. And at first, it gave us the exact same result same type of criminals as we identified previously, same demography, age, neighborhoods, everything was very similar. So we became a law enforcement authority that goes only against certain type of criminals, while we wanted actually to have diversity in the criminals that we are targeting and addressing. So law enforcement agencies have to take that, that was just one example, but they have to think very carefully on how to make sure that the algorithms do not suffer from certain bias that will lead to wrong results. Either, there are many different levels that could be taken into account. This is one thing. And also we should all take into account, the fact that machine make mistakes. So the final decision has to be made by analysts and not by a machine.
Well, and you bring up an issue too about now we're talking about the interaction between investigators, law enforcement, technology, and also the general public, whether it's the criminals or it's just the population at large. I know you've done some work relating to the privacy realm, and I'm wondering if you could share about how you've navigated this tension between compliance, law enforcement, and privacy.
Yeah, so in my past, I was also the head of the Israeli Privacy Protection Authority. So when I established that authority, I have a lot of background in the field. And there is always this tension between law enforcement activity and privacy. And I think, many people think that they are contradicting, but I think that those are that they are complementing each other. In terms of at least in the Israeli context, the FIU sits under the Ministry of Justice in order to protect the privacy of the public, to have a lot of data in one place, but it has to be extremely protected, and access to law enforcement is being granted only when you have a real suspicious about a certain offense. So I think that, when you are able to adopt highly sophisticated technology that allows, to identify patterns and network and bring up the relevant information out, then you are able to actually balance very nicely between privacy protection and law enforcement activity. You don't want to harm too much the privacy of people unless there is a particular need. And personally, I put together lots of enforcement on that. And AI is also something that allows us to add this additional layer of protection to make sure that there is this, separation between big data and actual investigations that are happening only on a need to do basis.
Well, we've talked so much about law enforcement and government agencies, but now in your current role, one of your current roles, you're working in payments in a payments company. What is, based on everything we've talked about or anything new? What either excites you about payments, or what do you think people should know about the payments industry moving forward?
Yeah. So first, let's connect it perhaps to the last point that we've discussed. It's AI. AI, I think it's going to change dramatically the payment industry and the payment domain. I'm currently working with a global payment company, Rapid, that works across the globe, and we embed very quickly a lot of AI technology. And what we see is first, it's mm, um, um, it improves dramatically the work that you are conducting when you're adopting AI. It improves the authorization rate, the analysis of transaction, profitability. All the processes are are becoming much more efficient. But in addition to that, I think that AI and highly regulated industries, for example, the financial sector, actually can benefit a lot from adopting those technology. Let's take it, to the law enforcement compliance world. There are many processes that if you use a machine could be much more productive. For example, the onboarding process. Once you are integrating AI technology into that, you can improve your consistency with policy completely. It sounds, perhaps weird, but because we want to ensure that our policies are being enforced, it's easier to do that many times with machine rather than with people. People make mistakes. Machine makes mistake too. However, when you're changing one parameter in the prompt, you could change that completely. You could monitor that and make sure that you're following your policy. Also, as I mentioned earlier, fraud prevention becomes much better, and the overall payment domain is going to change because algorithms will be able to transfer funds and transaction based on voice recognition and many other activities that are going to make everything move faster and smoother and so forth. And personally, I mean, we are adopting AI to so many processes, and that makes the compliance work much more efficient and accurate. Perhaps if I could also address it from a different angle, the tension or the connection between crypto and payments, I think that also there is a lot of changes that are going to happen there between payments world and crypto, because we see more and more merging that those worlds are being combined together, and payments company wants to use crypto as well. So you need to have different licenses, that's for sure. But when you want to combine them, the crypto world has to enter into payments when you need to have a real-time response and make sure that the transaction is safe and meets almost banking standards. And this is the stage in which I think, for example, as we mentioned earlier, that the crypto industry will have to change the standard of the way that they're screening transaction and doing the monitoring and analysis to actually be able to provide a real-time solution and response to allow those immediate transactions that need to go through the payment industry. So I think that both industries are going to kind of merge at some point and become much more advanced and secure.
Well, you can see the merger happening, especially now, as there's more of a discussion policy-wise about stablecoins. And we've talked about crypto. We haven't talked particularly about stablecoins. Any thoughts on how stablecoins are going to change or are changing global payments?
Yeah, so we see, by the way, we see that criminals and terrorists are preferring to use stablecoin rather than regular other cryptocurrencies. And the reason for that is simple. They want to make sure that the value of their assets is remain. They do not want to do speculative investment. They want to have, a consistent investment. So we see that in terms of like the trends, we see this merge between those industries and how customers of the payment industry do want to get the payments with stablecoin as well. And that poses many challenges because with payments you have different environment which is more regulated and easy to trace. That's not necessarily the situation with stablecoin. It also depends which stablecoin. And I think that there is a clear call for action here for regulators to create a better infrastructure on that. And as part of that, to set perhaps a better standard and understanding of what should be considered as a proper transaction or standards. It all connects, to the transaction monitoring capabilities that we have, that we discussed earlier.
Mm.
Also, the fact that it is possible in some of the stablecoin to freeze them from afar. So, like the operator has with USDC, for example, has the capability to freeze the accounts with accessing the wallet and actually take them. We see how that impacts the industry. And one interesting things that I learned is once authorities confiscated $180 million of stablecoin from a criminal network, it led immediately to a decrease of about $6 billion in the volume of using that particular coin after that activity. So what we see is that when law enforcement are taking actions, concrete actions vis-a-vis stablecoin, we see that the bad actors are trying to move to other coins just to make sure that their asset will not be confiscated. So we're still in a process of finding the right balance between them, but we're not there yet.
Finding the right balance, and I know to do that, there's balancing the opportunities with the risk. And I mean, maybe one sort of final thought that I have is, or I'd like to know from you, out of everything that you're observing, that you're seeing, what do you have the biggest concern about?
A challenge to trace asset and to combat the bad actors is always a challenge. This is like a cat and a mouse race. You'll never win you're never able to win in all fronts. However, I think that with new technologies right now, we do have an opportunity to improve that. First, I think that what frightened me the most, and I mentioned that earlier, is AI and deep fake synthetic content and the challenges that it creates. We're not going to be able to understand what's real and what's not, and there is a necessary an urgent need to address that. I think that it's going to create a lot of challenges to the financial domains. It's going to be open for many more hacks and activities, and I think that an immediate action is required here. So some of it will be achieved by more investment in technology, not only AI technology, but technology that is addressing safety and adversarial uses of AI. But also, I believe that at some point, also governments, including the US governments, which now, comes out with statement that they're not going to regulate the industry, I do think that they will need to address first national security issues related to that in order to address the gaps. As, by the way, the US government under the Trump administration did with respect to crypto a couple of years ago. I was working very closely with that team when they were addressing cryptocurrencies, global challenges, and the national security, terrorism, financing, financial crime aspect first. I think that the same will happen with AI to some extent, just to make sure that the non-legitimate use are being blocked to some extent. At least, national threats on deepfake and so forth, which impact dramatically the activity that we see now being adopted by criminals.
Shlomit, we've talked about crypto and criminals using it, but can you tell us about crypto being used for good?
Yes, definitely. I think that the advantages of cryptocurrencies and the ability to trace activity much easier in a much more easy way than cash actually make it very attractive to support, for example, humanitarian aid in conflict area. And a project that I led in the past year was actually to think, how crypto can be used in conflict zones when you have a real concerns that international aid, international funds will reach eventually, that will be provided to people in that region, will be channeled eventually to designate their organization. We could see that a lot, for example, in the Middle East, in Lebanon these days, where Hezbollah is acting, in Gaza when you have Hamas and so forth. And what I built is actually a program and infrastructure, how to facilitate international assistance provided by countries and international organizations to people who needs that using blockchain technology. For example, by relying on private stablecoin. that would be monitored and controlled in the on-ramp and off-ramp by certain stakeholders, it is possible to actually send out the aid through those channels and have full visibility and transparency on the uses of that, like creating a closed garden. And this is a great example of how blockchain advantages could be used to create, better good for the society in use cases that fit that perfectly well. And this project, for example, is now being adopted by government and international organization to use that to provide their aid through those channels. It's much safer than using cash or domestic banks or exchange or money exchangers that are more vulnerable to be misused in those situations. So that's a great opportunity for this industry to expand for additional use cases.
Any other words of advice for those that are out there in the industry and financial institutions?
Yeah, so I think that what I see along my career is that, and this is what helped us in Israel to successfully go through the FATF evaluation and the authority that I led, IMPA, to become much more effective. Is first to understand the risk that you're facing. You have to do this work and understand and craft what are the risks that you're addressing, and then to support it with a very strong technology. Once you are becoming a data-driven organization, you have the toolbox to address that not only with people, but also with machine, and be able to prioritize and address mainly the larger threats. It always needs to be a strategic resource allocation on how you look at the big picture, not only the particular cases, to be strategically successful and be able to do that in the most efficient way. And you should always do the balance between those aspects.
As Shlomit has explained, the world of financial crime is evolving. For law enforcement, successful operations don't just come from accessing new tech, but from figuring out how to build better investigative and analytic methods through new technologies. She also highlights that all technology is a tool that can be used, for good or bad, depending on who yields it and how. And that is where the real challenge lies for those on the front line in the fight against financial crime, keeping up with and staying one step ahead of those using new technological advances to support their illicit aims. I'm Yaya Jata Fanusie, and this is Designated on the Illicit Edge Network.